As you said, he had some consultations about that war, but that war was launched under a false pretext to actually deliver their judgment.
The very fact that you can actually say these things is a testament to the fact that the world has come a long ways from the days of the czars and the kings and the queens. I'm the king, off with your head. You'd be put in prison for saying a fraction of the things that you just said.
But I wonder why is it that freedom of speech is considered to be the domain of Western democracies? Freedom of speech, freedom of science, freedom of exploration existed in a non-democratic world as well.
Existing. I'm the king, off with your head.
Come out.
But Bill, isn't it a problem when science guys attempt to bully other people? I mean, Nick here had to say, I'm not a denier. He had to get it up. I'm not a denier, because really, the science group has tried to shame anyone who dares question this. And the point I'm trying to make is, however, the scare tactics have not worked. It's not working with the public.
I'm going to be silent.
No, you're...
Hold on. No, that's not true.
So you said you wouldn't talk.
But I did say.
Okay. I'm the king, off with your head.
And if I don't apply enough force, then it'll stay like some sort of misshaped, potato shape. So that's what gravity is doing, really. It's acting as a force that's squashing it down.
No, that's not true.
And it'll turn it into a sphere because it acts the same in every direction. And it'll turn it into a sphere because it acts the same in every direction.
No, that's not true. So you spin. When you spin pizza dough, it kind of flattens out. Yeah. Gets wider in the middle, and so Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning. No, that's not true. And it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere. It's oblate, and officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. No, that's not true! But not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator.
A little chubbier.
Yeah. Chubby's a good way. It's like pear-shaped. 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 No, that's not true!
I first heard this flat Earth subject, I dismissed it without even giving it a second thought. But more recently, at the beginning of 2015, I ran across a few flat Earth videos again. And while looking into the fake moon photos circulating around, I saw that people were claiming that the images from Earth from space were fake as well. Pretty soon, the flat Earth subject became viral online. And after looking at the Apollo missions one night and coming to the conclusion that they were nothing more than a huge con game, it jarred my memory about something. And for a very specific reason, I decided to look deeply into the flat Earth without just dismissing it blindly as so many do. Why did I look into it this time?
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond.
No, that's not true!
The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore.
No, that's not true!
We used to, but we destroyed that technology.
No, that's not true!
And it's a painful process to build it back again.
No, that's not true!
Well, I do pray for knowledge and wisdom and discernment, but maybe the recent Apollo footage I watched helped. However, I live near a very large lake, Lake Ontario, and I happen to remember going to the beach as a kid and looking across the lake and seeing New York State coast off in the distance. I never ever thought anything about it ever, except I remember it being there when I went to the beach. Now, I've been to that beach 100 times over the years. And once this topic gained more prominence in early 2015, the first video I saw explained the curvature of the Earth and what it's supposed to be in inches per mile. And it resonated with me because I remember that I could see clear across the lake to the other coast, something that broke all the sphere Earth rules. So with NASA fakery on my mind and the memory of seeing this coastline that supposedly was too far below the horizon for me to be able to see it due to the curvature of the Earth, I re-examined the flat Earth theory. And as unbelievable as it seemed, it started to make a lot of sense, especially since I did distinctly remember being able to see that far coast basically anytime I was at my local beach. And as I've said, I've been there hundreds of times over the years. But even so, I went back to the beach recently and stood at the shore. I looked south and guess what? I could see the New York State coastline just like I remember. Now I googled the distance and it was approximately 36 miles. I learned what the curvature of the Earth is supposed to be exactly at that distance, and according to the people that believe in the sphere, I found out that the coast should have been buried below my ability to see it by almost 900 feet. That part of the New York State coast had a top elevation of less than 300 feet. So that left at least a huge 600-foot discrepancy, and even more because I could see some of the height of the far shoreline. Was something really wrong with the reality that they've been selling us ever since we were born? Well, I ended up becoming a little fixated on proving or disproving the concept. And at first I truly thought disproving the flat Earth would be rather easy. I thought there had to be a reasonable explanation why I could see so far beyond the so-called curve barrier. I learned about light refraction and superior mirages. I learned about perspective and horizons. I learned about how our eyes work. I viewed dozens of similar experiences on YouTube. I listened to experts and people who thought they had logical but spherical explanations. In fact, I tried for a few months to debunk the concept and just couldn't. The more I looked into it, the more sense it made, and the less likely that the sphere model we've been spoon-fed since birth was a reality. It's just flat out wrong. And as more people shared their experiences and proofs online, it only added to my growing, pretty much unwavering belief that the world is not what we've been told. And learning about how our eyes work and how perspective work helps a lot with understanding sunrises and sunsets and ships disappearing hull first at sea and other supposed sphere Earth proofs. I can't say for certain what shape the Earth is or how big it is, or if there's an Antarctic ring or a barrier beyond it, or if it's an infinite plane. Maybe everything we theorize is not complete. There are so many possibilities that it blows the mind, and the flat Earth has no real complete standard model because it's all based on us finding out things for ourselves. We agree on the facts and certain basics, but the rest is only hypothetical even if it seemingly makes sense. And as the evidence mounts for both the flat Earth and against the sphere, I wanted to create a special place where folks can learn and share what they've learned with other supporters. Differences of opinion are certainly going to come forth and should be expressed openly. But remember that the goal of my videos and their corresponding threads is to provide the opportunity to use each of us to learn and grow in any area that any of us has a problem in. If there is a thing you can't understand, then ask. Someone will have an opinion and we can go from there. If you have a point to make against what is considered an accepted flat Earth fact, please provide any relevant links or supporting proofs or videos. I am currently under the impression that the entire space program, even the low Earth orbit, and all that is there, is really just a sleight-of-hand trick by a group of illusionists that have swindled the public, the governments of the world, the media, and us into believing a lie. Everybody, a small group of corporations and cabals have almost complete control over the entire financial, educational, high-level governmental and media systems, leaving it up to real armchair scientists and normal people that can critically think and recreate experiments themselves to independently prove or disprove any accepted line of thought about our reality. Look, I ain't the smartest man on the flat Earth, but I ain't no dummy. I'm educated, and I never ever questioned or ever thought of an alternative to a sphere Earth until this year. It never entered my mind to question this part of our reality at all, ever. But now I question everything. I'm a Christian, and I think I see the big picture.
It is the most marginalized, ridiculed, censored, and hidden fact in history. If this fact was made known to the world at large, just this one fact has the power to completely transform the world and everyone in it for the better, holistically, in a myriad of ways. Our rulers are well aware of this, and that is exactly why this truth has been held from us so expertly for so long. It is about the truth of who we are, where we come from, the actual position and significance of humans, Earth, the sun, moon, and stars. The fact is, the Earth is flat and motionless. That is all. And that is the revelation that will finally break the matrix. You have been taught from the earliest ages that you live on a spinning ball, that NASA has sent men to the moon, that satellites are hovering in perpetual orbit overhead, that an international space station contains astronauts free-floating above us, that the Earth is a ball that tilts, wobbles, spins on its axis, and revolves around the sun, and that all these, and you, are the result of a Big Bang cosmogenic explosion 14 billion years ago which created everything out of nothing. Yet nothing could be farther from the truth. The truth is simple and easily proven. You can see for yourself. The horizon is always flat, and you can measure using sextants, theodolites, and lasers to prove the Earth and its massive oceans have absolutely no curvature whatsoever. You can feel for yourself that the Earth beneath you is motionless, and you can measure, as Michelson, Morley, Gale, Sagnac, Airy, and other scientists have, to prove that the Earth is completely motionless. That's right. It has been long proven by several scientific experiments, even in the elitist peer-reviewed journals you critics constantly harp on about, that the Earth is a stationary plane. The reason you haven't heard about it before is because the media is controlled by the same people who created this deception. The only time you have ever heard a flat earther mentioned in the media, it was in jest or ridicule. The only thing you have ever heard about flat Earth is that its adherents are ignorant idiots. Sorry to burst your space bubble, but if you still think you're living on a spinning ball in 2016, you, my friend, are the ignorant one. Millions of people worldwide are waking up to this incredible rediscovery, and this flat Earth movement has the potential to bring about positive change on an unprecedented level. Like a balloon held underwater for 500 years, the momentum of truth rising to the surface is causing and will continue to cause huge ripples in the control system. As the spinning ball Earth is finally being exposed worldwide for the 500-year deception it was, Earth's entire population is suddenly being faced with the reality that every government, every space agency, university, secret society, religious organization, mainstream and alternative media outlet have all been duplicitous in propping up a monstrous manipulation to fleece and control the masses. The resulting mass mental exodus away from the control system is exactly what humanity needs. Once the flat Earth truth gets out, these lying politicians, spokesmen, reporters, and teachers suddenly change from being heralded voices of authority to being ridiculed, shunned, and denounced as they deserve. Once the flat Earth truth gets out, these governments, universities, media outlets, and other entangled organizations, which have long been hard at work weaving this multi-generational cosmological myth, suddenly and completely lose all credibility. Once the truth of our flat Earth gets out, so does the truth of these few elite families and societies who have kept this most important and fundamental reality from us for these hundreds of years. Essentially, once the flat Earth truth gets out, so does every other important truth by proxy, because this mother of all conspiracies holds under its umbrella literally all of the other conspiracies and exposes them. As a result of deeply understanding this, and wanting to bring about a better world, it has become my life mission to spread the Flat Earth truth to everyone. I have written 2 books on the subject, The Flat Earth Conspiracy, and 200 Proofs the Earth is Not a Spinning Ball. I have restarted the International Flat Earth Research Society, and maintain a website with hundreds of articles on the subject. I've done Flat Earth radio interviews, made Flat Earth FAQs, Flat Earth shirts, written Flat Earth rap songs, audio video books, documentaries, and created every other kind of media I can think of to try and promote this message. Now in just a few short years, thanks to the efforts of the rapidly growing Flat Earth community, this has gone from a completely unknown, undiscussed topic to one of the highest ranked Google search terms on the internet, with tens of millions of hits monthly. If you still haven't done your due diligence in researching to know for yourself 100% that you are living on a flat, stationary plane, please look into the links provided. And for those of you who do know, I implore you to help my mission, Operation Spread Flat Earth Truth. Simply knowing the truth yourself will not and cannot save the world. The only way to save the world is for the whole world to know the truth. As a means to that end, the most important type of activism anyone can be doing right now is spreading these important truths on a mass scale. There are innumerable creative ways to help achieve this. The following are several effective methods myself or friends have had success with. 1. Conversation. One of the best ways to engage people with the flat reality is through conversation. Asking leading questions, dropping hints, or just telling people various proofs and evidences is a great way to wake people up. This only works, however, if you are very knowledgeable about the subject yourself and able to answer every possible question without hesitation, like the liars at NASA do. 2. Viewing parties. Another good way to engage people is by getting them to agree to sit down and watch an informative documentary on the subject, such as my videos, The World's Biggest Secret, or The Masonic Matrix Manipulators. After watching, you can then do your best to field any questions people may have. 3. Book gifting. A great indirect way of engaging people is by buying and giving them copies of The Flat Earth Conspiracy, 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Ball, or other good books on the subject. If you own Flat Earth books yourself, be sure to let friends and family borrow them as well. 4. School projects. If you are currently in school or university, a great way to expose this information is by writing essays or doing projects which tackle various aspects of ball earth pseudoscience or expose true flat earth findings. 5. Social media. I have had great success using social media to spread flat earth truth. Simply create accounts with all the big social media sites like Facebook, Google+, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Reddit, StumbleUpon, etc. Join relevant groups and pages, follow people interested in related subjects, and post the best flat earth material you can find to as many places as you can, as often as you can. Don't bother arguing with the trolls and closed minds that will inevitably hound you, but rather focus on dissemination, spreading the message far and wide. If people ask genuine questions, be sure to answer, but anyone merely looking to ridicule should be left alone to talk with themselves. 6. YouTube and other video sharing sites. With 13 million hits and growing, my YouTube channel has done an excellent job spreading this message. We need more people to start Flat Earth YouTube and other video sharing site channels, either creating original content or just re-uploading other good content. I personally have given everyone permission to use any and all of my content to help spread the word. Once you upload a new video to YouTube, then go to all your social media accounts and post each new video to all the relevant pages, groups, and timelines you can. 7. Translations. For multilingual flat earthers, one of the best things you can do is help translate good flat earth material into your native tongue. My book, 200 Proofs Earth is Not a Spinning Ball, has now been translated into 12 different languages and counting, reaching people who would otherwise never have a chance of understanding this material, the majority of which currently exists only in English. 8. Graffiti or artwork. Another great method of spreading the word is through artwork or graffiti. Writing important search terms or keywords and phrases on paper money is also very effective. On the borders of your dollar bills, simply write atlanteanconspiracy.com, ifers.123.st. The Earth is flat. Google Flat Earth. Google Eric Dubay, or other such messages. 9. Pamphleteering or stickers. Creating small brochures or stickers with flat earth information on them and handing them out in public spaces is an excellent way to spread the word. Compile several photo proofs or text proofs and put them in an easily printable and readable format, then hand out as many as you can. 10. Radio or TV show call-ins. Many different TV and radio shows give their viewers or listeners the opportunity to call in and talk with the host about certain subjects. A great way to spread the word is either by calling into these shows and engaging them on the subject on the spot, or contacting their producers beforehand and seeing if you could actually be interviewed. There are an infinite number of creative ways we can spread this most important message, but the key is numbers and consistency. We need to hit a critical mass tipping point of awakened individuals dedicated to helping unplug everyone else from the spinning ball Earth matrix. If you have figured out the truth of our flat Earth and realized the amazing positive implications of this being exposed worldwide, please join me on my mission to help spread the flat Earth truth to the entire flat world.
So, Flat Earth for newbies. Flat Earth 101. When some people come to the Flat Earth for the first time, they can't quite grasp what our model looks like or how it works. This video is a very quick, basic understanding of the model with an emphasis on basic. The study of the Flat Earth by the masses, such as what is going on now, is being performed by amateurs such as myself and many others with absolutely no funding, and it has really only been happening since maybe the beginning of 2015. While we find it rather easy to disprove the spherical Earth and the heliocentric model, we admittedly do not have all of our ducks in a row for the flat Earth model, and what I am presenting is in no way supposed to represent a complete working model or a mechanism behind the model. Now, with that understood, let's just take a look at what's going on here. So, what does the flat Earth look like? Well, the ocean's deepest point isn't really that far, and the Russians' super deep digging project only dug down about 8 miles or so. So I can't really tell you what's under the crust of the Earth, except that the Bible says it's not such a nice place. And believe it or not, we've only really gone up into the sky as high as maybe 20 or 30 miles. So I really can't tell you what's up there either, beyond what we can see with amateur rockets and weather balloon footage. In the flat Earth model, the sun and the moon are the same size, and they're both a lot closer and a lot smaller than the heliocentric model claims. Whatever we think is holding space away from the atmosphere of Earth is called, for lack of a better word, the firmament in the Bible, and it seems that it's bowl-shaped, like a dome. The stars seem to be in that dome, and the whole thing seems to rotate above us, right over the center of the disc-shaped Earth, which is the North Pole, spinning seemingly around Polaris every 23 hours, 56 minutes. So we might have trouble describing the underbelly or the heavens above, but we can get a picture, a basic idea of what the plane of the flat Earth looks like from old maps, from sailing records, and from first-hand reports. Now, as it turns out, it looks a lot like the UN logo, which is taken from a map projection called the Azimuthal Equidistant, or AE for short. For the flat Earth model to work, the Earth does not have to look exactly like this, but it's close enough so you get the idea. This is just a representation that most flat Earthers use for now, until better data comes in. Now, as it stands, flat Earthers do not believe that Antarctica is an actual continent at the bottom of the ball. We know that the ball is a hoax meant to deceive people and keep the creator away from their thoughts. Antarctica is probably nothing more than a small part of the ice ring that jets out a little bit, or even maybe a comparatively small island, but it's not an actual massive continent island at the bottom of the ball. Now, there are bases there and people there at a place that they call Antarctica, and the public can even take tours there if they want and spend $5,000 or $10,000, but it's a heavily guarded, protected area, and there is a real treaty with the military presence stopping people from going there on their own. And they've even been caught faking 24-hour sun footage. But enough about Antarctica. That's a whole video on its own, to which there are plenty online to choose from. Now, looking down from above, the Earth would look like a circle with the north magnetic pole smack in the middle. Picture a dartboard or a CD or a disc. As you can see, the land masses are spread out all over the flat disk. And now imagine the land having a raised edge at the end, kind of like a pizza has. But we'll pretend the crust is made of ice instead, and it's several hundred feet high everywhere, which keeps the water in so it doesn't fall off the edge. And just to be clear, we are not even sure that there is an edge to fall off of, so to speak. The ice could go on forever or not, we just don't know. That edge is Antarctica, and it is not an island, but it's rather a ring of ice that surrounds the entire disk, and we're really not sure how deep it goes or what is out there. The sun and moon travel around the face of the Earth, as described, like the hands of a clock move around its face. And as a matter of fact, picture a circle around you as a 24-hour clock. If you point yourself due south with a compass and act as if that's 12 noon on the clock, then the sun's position in the sky will actually act like a giant clock hand and tell you what time it is. Now this is based on 24-hour time, like I said, but the sun acts like the hour hand because the Earth is really a circle like clock face, and the sun takes 24 hours to go and circle around its 24 time zones. Now
Now
go outside and point due south and try it. Remember not to factor in daylight savings time. The moon likewise circles above us, but a little slower than the sun, giving us the phases and showing us the months. Together they are a real calendar. The light is cast on the Earth, and how much of it you can see will depend on your position relative to it. Perspective accounts for sunsets and sunrises, which other videos will attest to in greater detail. The sun is simply moving too far away from the observer to see it any longer, as it gets smaller and disappears on the horizon. The light is cast from the sun onto the Earth at different diameters depending on the time of year. And because the sun spirals in and out throughout the course of the year, this causes seasons. Let's start out roughly on September 21st. The equinox is where we supposedly have equal days and nights all over the Earth. The sun travels over the equator on that day. Now as the year progresses, the sun will spiral outwards, making even larger circles and maintaining the same 24-hour rotation. As it spirals outwards, the days get shorter, that's the daylight, and colder for each location north of its position, while to the south it gets longer, the daylight, and warmer. This maxes out on December 21st, while the sun is over the Tropic of Capricorn. The sun hangs out there for a few days, and then the sun starts its journey back the way it came, making tighter and tighter circles. Thus the south now gets colder and receives less daylight, while the north gets hotter and receives more daylight. The sun will continue this tighter spiraling pattern for 6 months, until it arrives over the Tropic of Cancer, which brings the hottest and longest days for locations to its north, and the opposite for those to its south. It likewise hangs out for a few days and then starts the pattern all over again. In the flat Earth model, the sun and the moon are the same size, and they're both a lot closer and a lot smaller than the heliocentric model claims. North is always towards the center of the map no matter where you are on it. So if you pointed a compass due north, opposite of you would be due south. And because of this, east and west are never straight lines. They are always curving slightly, and our distance from the central pole would determine the amount that curve would be noticed. Now on a flat map, Antarctica is not a continent on the bottom of the ball. It's an ice ring that surrounds the flat Earth. So Antarctica is the South Pole, or opposite to the north. And actually, if we picture a speaker magnet, that's kind of how it works. A magnetic center with an opposite outer ring. Magellan and Columbus did not prove a sphere. On the flat map, their travels are merely east to west, which are quite doable. They could continue one direction and get back to exactly where they started, just as this image details. Now, boats disappearing bottom first from the horizon are not really going over any curve of the Earth. It's perspective, and we have plenty of zoom footage on video to prove it. Gravity is density, weight, and buoyancy. It doesn't have to depend on a spinning Earth, as pseudoscience would have you believe. Now, science is wonderful, but astrotheology is not real science. They should stick to writing fiction instead of teaching their religion as a fact. In fact, it is the majority of flat earthers' opinions that most people out there really that still believe in the heliocentric lie. They don't know what they believe. And if they did, they probably wouldn't believe it anymore. See, the people that organize and run NASA, along with some of the leading so-called scientists in the world, with the help of the media and the educational systems that are controlled by the bad guys, have reinforced the heliocentric lie that was started a very long time ago. Of course, the church had a major role in this. Now it's had centuries and centuries to cultivate and prove itself, and the Flat Earth movement finally gained enough traction that in 1 year it almost dismantled the whole thing. I imagine that 2016 will be even larger, more viral, and the people of the world will no longer be able to avoid it or be shielded from it. So I ask you, are you ready for what's going to come next?
Okay, here's a little illustrator or a little cartoon from a website called timeanddate.com. It's really funny that they would have a perfect illustration of a sun rising and setting on a flat Earth due to perspective. You'll notice that it rises from below the horizon and sets below the horizon. Now you might be saying, well, how's that possible? I can see now you're saying that it rises and lowers due to perspective, but how does it disappear below the horizon? Well, I got a theory about that. Because of the fact that all parallel lines and planes converge at your eye level horizon, this is according to the perspective, I'm not making this up. If in fact, and they do, they converge at your eye level horizon visually, then it makes sense that after that point, they diverge, meaning they then separate. So the sun would continue on a downward track. As you can see from my illustration here, the lines would go to your horizon, and then afterwards, they would spread out and separate, kind of like a starburst, and the starburst being at your horizon, at your focal point.
Where is the curvature? Where? No curvature.
Tells us that we're not moving. Common sense tells us that we're not moving. Astrophysicists and space agencies have tried to con the world into believing their very satanic heliocentric lie. And they have done rather well up until now. But the cat's out of the bag, and this lie cannot continue forever. Rockets can't work in a vacuum such as so-called space. There's nothing to thrust against. There's no atmosphere for the fuel to push on for an opposite reaction to occur. So once we reach space under rocket power, we couldn't steer or accelerate or slow down or stop. Certain space agencies and astrophysicists and myth-busting hosts claim otherwise, but you know, they've even published equations that prove otherwise, but while their equations probably declare that the rockets in space work, actually going through the math and performing the physical tests proves otherwise. And that's why we never see a rocket or even the highly televised shuttle missions actually enter this so-called vacuum called space. And while their equations preface certainly declares that they do, going through the math and performing the physical tests proves that rockets can't work in space. In stage one of these two similar experiments, a balloon is blown up and it's placed in the place of rocket fuel, and it's attached to the straw, and it's taped to a toy car. Now the balloon is released and the air travels through the straw, and the car is propelled forward as expected. In stage two, the two scientists will try to disperse the air that's coming out of the straw to act as the vacuum would in space. Let's watch these two-stage experiments unfold and see what happens when the atmosphere is removed from the equation. The person on the right tries it with a vacuum cleaner and misses on his first attempt to get it in exactly the right spot. The person on the left makes a paper deflector to show that the opposite reaction is based off the fuel pushing off the atmosphere outside the vehicle. The person on the right tries a few more times with the vacuum cleaner, and on his fourth attempt he gets it in just the right spot and the car doesn't move. He misses again on 5, but on number 6 he places the hose just perfectly, and once again the rocket car doesn't move even an inch. The contention is that this shows that the rocket is dependent on the atmosphere to push off of for its opposite reaction. The rocket needs an atmosphere to move. When we take away that atmosphere, the rocket doesn't move. On the left, deflecting the motion of the air rushing out of the straw shows that the opposite reaction needed for thrust is escaping fuel hitting the atmosphere. The person on the left releases the balloon and the air rushes out, and is deflected to the right and left, and the vehicle doesn't move forward. Rockets can't work in space. Before satellites were thought of, there were already technologies allowing us to send long-distance messages without wires. Ground-based systems for telephones and radio were being used by people on both sides of the pond. We were able to transmit through the atmosphere and skip signals off of the firmament, whatever that is, to the other side of the Earth using ham radios. There are many ham radio operators today and lots of clubs all over the world. Marconi sent a message across the Atlantic over, 100 years ago. And all technologies were well established and working fine using only ground-based operations. Today, we still use ground-based systems to connect to each other via cable television, phone lines, the internet with fiber optic, transatlantic cables, and RF towers. There's tens of thousands of huge RF towers used to broadcast all kinds of signals all over the world, and they're still being built in today's satellite age. Your cell phone signal has a limited range depending on who your provider is and how many towers their system is linked to. Even if satellites were real, they are simply not needed to do what they say they're doing. We can do it better and cheaper from the ground. People that work in the satellite field are really working on tangible things that really work and do what they say they're doing. But it is not what those techs and the rest of us are being led to believe, since space and everything up there is simply not as they're telling us it is. If there are devices up high in the sky helping with communications, then NASA probably reconfigures them to work wherever they want them to work. And maybe doing it with hot air balloons or some kind of secret advanced technology, but they're definitely not putting anything up in so-called space. Alright, so what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned that we really can't trust NASA and that they never went to the moon. That they faked everything, including weightlessness from zero-G high-altitude planes. They faked pictures of Earth from space, and that we never even went to space because rockets can't work in a vacuum. Of course, that starts to mess with people's minds because we can actually use electronic devices every day which supposedly depend on satellite technology up in space. Now, I've said this before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. The technology exists, but none of it is based up in space. There are no satellites orbiting the supposedly spherical Earth. And people working in the satellite technology, sure there are, but no one is denying that. But whatever is being done with that piece of hardware is not being strapped onto a rocket and shot into outer space. So I guess now it's time to take a look at satellites and see what's really going on and how we can make sense of satellite TVs and satellite phones and GPS and things like that. So here we go. Geosynchronous or geostationary satellites were actually a fictional creation of the famous science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, who was also a high-ranking Freemason. And about a decade later, they became a so-called reality that we all ended up paying for with our taxes and our higher bills for such things as cable and internet, things like that. So basically, a Freemason created a piece of fiction, and then all his compatriots convinced us all that it was tangible and a reality. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people working on tech that is supposed to be satellite related. I'm saying that satellite tech does not go into space. Where they say satellites are actually located is in itself a work of fiction, like the concepts of warp speed and dark matter, multiple universes, or string theory, just to name a few. The Google Loon project plans to string hundreds of weather balloons all the way around the Earth at around the 40-degree south latitude mark, which has very little land and is mostly open ocean. They will be all the way around the Earth so that people living in the south can all get the internet, basically just as easily as those of us in the north, because most of the area down there is over ocean water, and there is no service over the ocean. Even though they say we have tens of thousands of satellites in orbit. 40,000 now, I think. Now this doesn't make sense if the heliocentric model is true. And it doesn't make sense if we have all those satellites in space. Plus, it'd be easier and cheaper just to send a few satellites up compared to hundreds of weather balloons that need to be constantly adjusted and maintained. So if satellites were real, why not simply use them? Of course, when we look at the coverage area on the flat Earth map, things start to make a little more sense. Many believe that our satellite communication and GPS, telephone, internet, etc. is not coming from space. Over the land, they use cell towers to bounce signals to and fro, but over the oceans they can't. However, over water, balloons, blimps, boats, and planes can bounce signals to and fro. Which is exactly what Google Loon plans to do, because space is fake and satellites are not up there. Satellites exist and function in some fashion, but they are not up in space orbiting the Earth. And Google Loon is a good example as to why. Plus, they could use those balloons for other reasons. GPS, black boxes, telephone service, TVs, and just about anything else that transmits digitally are examples. And we've been doing that sort of thing with dishes and towers long before satellites were theorized. In mainland USA, TV satellite dishes are almost always pointed at or near a 45-degree angle. It's towards the nearest ground-based repeater tower. If they were getting their signal from a geostationary satellite in space, then they should all be pointing at between 80 and 100-degree angles, which is basically straight up into space, since geostationary satellites, by very definition, match Earth's supposed spin and stay in one location. The constant 45-degree angle that almost all dishes in the mainland US are pointed to proves that they're picking up ground-based signals from repeater towers and not from geostationary satellites in space. Think about it, and then go have a look at a few dishes in your own area. What angle is your dish pointing? Rotation, so that they seem like they are staying over one location at all times. If that's the case, then satellite communication should always work and never go out. But satellite TV and satellite internet and satellite phones do not work well in countries like Kazakhstan, for example, or in virtually any southern continental island where there are coincidentally only a few or no cell phone towers. Satellite tech does not work well in places where there are few cell towers compared to the US. But if they were where they say they are, way up in space, then we should always get a signal, regardless of the number of cell phone towers that a particular location has. Even the best satellite tech on Earth can't work without cell tower. Temperature is around 4,500 degrees where most satellites live. The components that make up a satellite cannot withstand that kind of heat, and they would literally turn into molten globs of metal pretty quickly. NASA has a little fast talk to try to get them out of this pickle, but they very clearly contradict their own words and set of laws by claiming that even though it is indeed really hot up there, these crafts don't feel it because the atmosphere is actually quite thin. How are they able to measure it to begin with, let alone be able to compare it to the surrounding area? They couldn't even last a minute in that kind of heat. NASA says that there are more than 20,000 satellites orbiting the Earth. Actually, it's 40,000, bringing us such goodies as satellite TV, GPS, cell phone signals, and weather information. And of course, pictures of the Earth from space. They admit, however, that all of their images from space are really just composites and strips of data that have been strung together to form images after being photoshopped to make them look appealing. Now, there are no real images from space, not even of the famous Blue Marble series from the Apollo missions. We've all seen the pics of Earth from space and satellites in schools, encyclopedias, and in history books, and they're all demonstrably fake. Green screens, layers, and CGI, and paintings, animations, models, and cartoons, but no real pictures. People claim to see satellites with the naked eye, even though they are only the size of a small bus or smaller and supposedly orbit hundreds or thousands of miles up. In reality, we all struggle to see a commercial plane relatively close to us at, 5 to 7 miles high due to the laws of perspective. We simply cannot see something that small from that far away, even if it had the most powerful set of lights ever invented strapped under it to its underbelly. Now let's have a look at some low Earth orbiting objects such as the International Space Station, or ISS for short. NASA says that the ISS orbits at only 250 miles high, but that is only 1/32 of the Earth's diameter higher than the Earth itself. And imagine an ant on a basketball. Raise that ant to half an inch off the ground. And now look at that ball with the ant from the opposite side of that ant and see if you can see the ant, which you can't. Then the sun can't shine its light onto the ISS during the nighttime. The Earth itself would block out that portion of the sun's light from reaching the ISS. So how can we see a reflection of sunlight off of the ISS at night? Well, we can't. And the fact is that, at least for now, the truth community doesn't really know what's flying around up there, or how large it is, or how high up it is. And the fact that we can see some light from something at all means that it just cannot be the ISS orbiting at only 250 miles high. In my opinion, in lieu of what has just been stated, it's kind of ridiculous to think otherwise. Whether it's a satellite flying so far away that we can't possibly see it from Earth, or if it's the ISS flying too close to Earth so we can't see it at night, whatever it is we are seeing, that's not what we've been told. If it is a man-made object, we know that it's high up, but it's not in space. But for all we know, it's a natural body moving around like the wandering stars that they have tracked and named the ISS. Before satellites were thought of, there were already technologies allowing us to send long-distance messages without wires. Ground-based systems for telephones and radio were being used by people on both sides of the pond. We were able to transmit through the atmosphere and skip signals off of the firmament, whatever that is, to the other side of the Earth using ham radios. There are many ham radio operators today and lots of clubs all over the world. Marconi sent a message across the Atlantic over, 100 years ago. And all technologies were well established and working fine using only ground-based operations. Today, we still use ground-based systems to connect to each other via cable television, phone lines, the internet with fiber optic, transatlantic cables, and RF towers. There's tens of thousands of huge RF towers used to broadcast all kinds of signals all over the world, and they're still being built in today's satellite age. Your cell phone signal has a limited range depending on who your provider is and how many towers their system is linked to. Even if satellites were real, they are simply not needed to do what they say they're doing. We can do it better and cheaper from the ground. People that work in the satellite field are really working on tangible things. Things that really work and do what they say they're doing. But it is not what those techs and the rest of us are being led to believe, since space and everything up there is simply not as they're telling us it is. If there are devices up high in the sky helping with communications, then NASA probably reconfigures them to work wherever they want them to work. And maybe doing it with hot air balloons or some kind of secret advanced technology, but they're definitely not putting anything up in so-called space. Before satellites were even thought of, we already had worldwide navigation systems in place. LORAN and DECA used radio signal pulses between RF towers to pinpoint a vessel's location. Many people contend that today's GPS is merely an extension of those old ground-based systems, and that GPS does not beam any information down to Earth from space. There is no such thing as real satellites in space. Fictional, sure, but real? Nope. And the fact is that we don't need satellites to provide the information that they supposedly do. We've been doing it from the ground for decades, and they still build RF towers today like crazy.
Operating 24 hours a day, numerous nations maintain a network of LORAN transmitting stations to service the major shipping lanes. There are a pair here, for example, Sisconsit and Bodie Island. One is known as the master station, the other is the slave. For a moment, consider these two stations operating as a synchronous pair, simultaneously emitting short pulses of radio energy. Leaving both shore stations simultaneously, a pair of pulses travel out into space, in all directions, at a constant speed, roughly 186,000 miles per second, or the speed of light. Plus, the pulse from the closer station will reach the ship an instant before the pulse from the other station. The LORAN ship board gear measures this difference in time of arrival, in millionths of a second, or microseconds. It simply determines how much longer one pulse takes to reach the ship than the other pulse. Now, this same time interval will be observed at many points within the range of the two shore stations. And when connected, these points form a hyperbola, known as the LORAN line of position. To aid the navigator in obtaining a fix, specially prepared LORAN tables and charts contain accurately plotted lines of position on the various time differences encountered in a particular area. Having one line of position, we then obtain readings from another pair of stations. An accurate fix is established at the intersection of the two lines of position.
Earth isn't flat. And by the way, this is called gravity.
No, that's not true!
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
Wow.
No, here's the difference. We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things. We can measure it, predict with it. But when you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know.
And by the way, this is called gravity.
No, that's not true!
What is gravity?
When you start asking, like, what it is, I don't know. This is called gravity.
The formation and collection of matter in the universe follows the laws of physics, and when you add in the dark matter, this extra gravity, it turns the universe into the universe that we see. That's why we know the dark matter is real.
No, that's not true!
We don't know what it is, but we know it's there because we can't make the universe as we see it unless we put this extra gravity into our simulations. That's the gravity that we see.
So you know it's something.
It's something. It's something. Doesn't it interact with our light, with our telescopes, but that it has gravity, so these particles are doing their own thing. Invisible to us, but otherwise attracting our matter into their, nucleating us among them.
If you fill a balloon with helium, a substance lighter than the nitrogen, oxygen, and other elements which compose the air around it, the balloon will immediately fly upwards. If you fill a balloon with hydrogen, a substance even lighter than helium, the balloon will fly upwards even faster. If you blow a dandelion seed out of your hands, a substance just barely heavier than the air, it will float away and slowly but eventually fall to the ground. And if you drop an anvil from your hands, something much heavier than the air, it will quickly and directly fall straight to the ground. Now this has absolutely nothing to do with gravity. The fact that light things rise up and heavy things fall down is simply a natural property of weight and density. That is very different from gravity. Gravity is a hypothetical magnetic-like force possessed by large masses which Isaac Newton needed to help explain the heliocentric theory of the universe. Lady Blunt says, most people in England have either read or heard that Sir Isaac Newton's theory of gravitation was originated by his seeing an apple fall to the earth from a tree in his garden. Persons gifted with ordinary common sense would say that the apple fell down to earth because, bulk for bulk, it was heavier than the surrounding air. But if, instead of the apple, a fluffy feather had been detached from the tree, a breeze would probably have sent the feather floating away, and the feather would not reach the earth until the surrounding air became so still that, by virtue of its own density, the feather would fall to the ground. Wilbur Voliva, a famous flat earther in the early 20th century, gave lectures all over America against Newtonian astronomy. He would begin by walking on stage with a book, a balloon, a feather, and a brick, and ask the audience, how is it that a law of gravitation can pull up a toy balloon and cannot put up a brick? I throw up this book, why doesn't it go on up? That book went up as far as the force behind it forced it, and it fell because it was heavier than the air, and that is the only reason. I cut the string of a toy balloon. It rises, gets to a certain height, and then it begins to settle. I take this brick and a feather. I blow the feather. Yonder it goes. Finally, it begins to settle and comes down. This brick goes up as far as the force forces it, and then it comes down because it is heavier than the air. That is all. David Wardlaw Scott says, "Any object which is heavier than the air, and which is unsupported, has a natural tendency to fall by its own weight. Newton's famous apple at Woolsthorpe, or any other apple when ripe, loses hold of its stalk, and being heavier than the air, drops as a matter of necessity to the ground, totally irrespective of any attraction of the earth. For if such attraction existed, why does not the earth attract the rising smoke, which is not nearly so heavy as the apple? The answer is simple, because the smoke is lighter than the air, and therefore does not fall but ascends. Gravitation is only a subterfuge employed by Newton in his attempt to prove that the earth revolves around the sun, and the quicker it is relegated to the tomb of all the Capulets, the better will it be for all classes of society." Thomas Winship says, "The law of gravitation is said by the advocates of the Newtonian system of astronomy to be the greatest discovery of science, and the foundation of the whole of modern astronomy. If, therefore, it can be shown that gravitation is a pure assumption, and an imagination of the mind only, that it has no existence outside of the brains of its expounders and advocates, the whole of the hypothesis of this modern so-called science fall to the ground as flat as the surface of the ocean, and this most exact of all sciences, this wonderful feat of the intellect, becomes at once the most ridiculous superstition and the most gigantic imposture to which ignorance and credulity could ever be exposed." Einstein's theory of relativity and the entire heliocentric model of the universe hinge upon Newton's law of gravitation. Heliocentrists claim that the sun is the most massive object in the heavens, more massive even than the earth, and therefore the earth and other planets, by law, are caught up in the sun's gravity and forced to orbit perpetual circles and ellipses around it. They claim that gravity also somehow allows people, buildings, the oceans, and all of nature to exist on the underside of their ball Earth without falling off. Now, even if gravity did exist, why would it cause both planets to orbit the sun and people to stick to the Earth? Gravity should either cause people to float in suspended circular orbits around the Earth, or it should cause the Earth to be pulled and crashed into the sun. What sort of magic is gravity that it can glue people's feet to the ball Earth while causing Earth itself to revolve ellipses around the sun? The two effects are very different, yet the same cause is attributed to both. Furthermore, this magnetic-like attraction of massive objects gravity is purported to have can be found nowhere in the natural world. There is no example in nature of a massive sphere or any other shaped object which, by virtue of its mass alone, causes smaller objects to stick to or orbit around it. There is nothing on Earth massive enough that it can be shown to cause even a dust bunny to stick to or orbit around it. Try spinning a wet tennis ball or any other spherical object with smaller things placed on its surface, and you will find that everything falls or flies off and nothing sticks to or orbits around it. To claim the existence of a physical law without a single practical evidential example is hearsay, not science. Lady Blunt and Albert Smith wrote, "That bodies in some instances are seen to approach each other is a fact, but that their mutual approach is due to an attraction or pulling process on the part of these bodies is, after all, a mere theory. Hypotheses may sometimes be admissible, but when they are invented to support other hypotheses, they are not only to be doubted, but discredited and discarded. The hypothesis of a universal force called gravitation is based upon, and was indeed invented with a view to support another hypothesis, namely that the earth and sea together make up a vast globe whirling away through space, and therefore needing some force or forces to guide it in its mad career, and so control it as to make it conform to what is called its annual orbit around the sun. The theory, first of all, makes the earth to be a globe, then not a perfect globe, but an oblate spheroid, flattened at the poles, then more oblate, until it was in danger of becoming so flattened that it would be like a cheese, and passing over minor variations of form, we are finally told that the earth is pear-shaped, and that the ellipsoid has been replaced by an apoid. What shape it may assume next, we cannot tell. It will depend upon the whim or fancy of some astute and speculating scientist. How is it that gravity is so strong that it can hold all the oceans, buildings, and people stuck to the underside of the ball Earth, but so weak that it allows birds, bugs, smoke, and balloons to casually evade its grips completely? How is it that gravity holds our bodies clung to the underside of a ball Earth, but yet we can easily raise our legs and arms, walk or jump, and feel no such constant downward pulling force? How is it that gravity can cause planets to revolve elliptical orbits around a single center of attraction? Ellipses by nature require two foci, and the force of gravitation would have to regularly increase and decrease to keep planets in constant orbit and prevent pulling them into direct collision courses. Thomas Winship says that the sun's path is an exact circle for only about 4 periods in a year, and then of only a few hours at the equinoxes and solstices, completely disproves the might have been of circular gravitation, and by consequence all of gravitation. If the sun were of sufficient power to retain the Earth in its orbit when nearest the sun, when the Earth arrived at that part of its elliptical path farthest from the sun, the attractive force, unless very greatly increased, would be utterly incapable of preventing the Earth rushing away into space in a right line forever, as astronomers say. On the other hand, it is equally clear that if the sun's attraction were just sufficient to keep the Earth in its proper path when farthest from the sun, and thus to prevent it rushing off into space, the same power of attraction when the Earth was nearest the sun would be so much greater that, unless the attraction were very greatly diminished, nothing would prevent the Earth rushing towards and being absorbed by the sun, there being no counterbalancing focus to prevent such a catastrophe. As astronomy makes no reference to the increase and diminution of the attractive force of the sun, called gravitation, for the above necessary purposes, we are again forced to the conclusion that the great discovery of which astronomers are so proud is absolutely non-existent. And N. Crossland says, "We are asked by the Newtonian to believe that the action of gravitation, which we can easily overcome by the slightest exercise of volition in raising a hand or foot, is so overwhelmingly violent when we lose our balance and fall a distance of a few feet, that this force, which is imperceptible under usual conditions, may, under extraordinary circumstances, cause the fracture of every limb we possess. Common sense must reject this interpretation. Gravitation does not furnish a satisfactory explanation of the phenomena here described, whereas the definition of weight already given does, for a body seeking in the readiest manner its level of stability would produce precisely the result experienced. If the influence which kept us securely attached to this earth were identical with that which is powerful enough to disturb a distant planet in its orbit, we should be more immediately conscious of its masterful presence and potency, whereas this influence is so impotent in the very spot where it is supposed to be most dominant that we find an insurmountable difficulty in accepting the idea of its existence." Heliocentrists claim the ball Earth is perpetually spinning on its axis at a mind-numbing 1,038 miles per hour, or 19 miles per second, and somehow people, animals, buildings, oceans, and other surface phenomena can stick to the underside of the spinning ball without falling or flying off. Take a ride on the Gravitron at your local amusement park, however, and notice how the faster it spins, the more you are pushed away from the center of spin, not towards it. Even if the centripetal, inward-pulling force of gravity did exist, which it does not, the centrifugal, outward-pushing force of the ball Earth's supposed 19-mile-per-second spin would also exist and have to be overcome, yet neither of these opposing forces have ever been shown to have any existence outside the imaginations of heliocentric scientists. David Wardlaw Scott says, "We are not like flies which, by the peculiar formation of their feet, can crawl on a ball, but we are human beings who require a plane surface on which to walk, and how could we be fastened to the earth whirling, according to your theory, around the sun, at the rate of 19 miles per second? The famed law of gravitation will not avail, though we are told that we have 15 pounds of atmosphere pressing on every square inch of our bodies, but this does not appear to be particularly logical, for there are many athletes who can leap nearly their own height and run a mile in less than 5 minutes, which they could not possibly do if they were thus handicapped." And Crossland says, "The attraction of gravitation is said to be stronger at the surface of the earth than at a distance from it. Is it so? If I spring upwards perpendicularly, I cannot with all my might ascend more than 4 feet from the ground. But if I jump In a curve with a low trajectory, keeping my highest elevation about 3 feet, I might clear a bound of space above the Earth of about 18 feet, so that practically I can overcome the so-called force pull at the distance of 4 feet in the proportion of 18:4, being the very reverse of what I ought to be able to do according to the Newtonian hypothesis. Newton also theorized, and it is now commonly taught, that the Earth's ocean tides are caused by gravitational lunar attraction. If the Moon is only 2,160 miles in diameter and the Earth 8,000 miles, however, using their own math and law, it follows that the Earth is 87 times more massive, and therefore the larger body should attract the smaller to it, and not the other way around. If the Earth's greater gravity is what keeps the Moon in orbit, it is impossible for the Moon's lesser gravity to supersede the Earth's gravity at Earth's sea level, where its gravitational attraction would even further out-trump the Moon's. Not to mention the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and should therefore exert a uniform influence on the Earth's tides, when in actuality the Earth's tides vary greatly. Furthermore, if ocean tides are caused by Moon's gravitation, how is it that lakes, ponds, and other smaller bodies of standing water remain outside the Moon's grasp, while the gigantic oceans are so affected? Thomas Winship says, "If the Moon lifted up the water, it is evident that near the land the water would be drawn away and low instead of high tide caused. Again, the velocity and path of the Moon are uniform, and it follows that if she exerted any influence on the Earth, that influence could only be a uniform influence. But the tides are not uniform. At Port Natal, the rise and fall is about 6 feet, while at Beira, about 600 miles up the coast, the rise and fall is 26 feet. This effectually settles the matter that the Moon has no influence on the tides. Tides are caused by the gentle and gradual rise and fall of the Earth on the bosom of the mighty deep. In inland lakes there are no tides, which also proves that the Moon cannot attract either the Earth or water to cause tides, but the fact that the basin of the lake is on the Earth, which rests on the waters of the deep, shows that no tides are possible, as the waters of the lakes together with the Earth rise and fall, and thus the tides at the coast are caused, while there are no tides on waters unconnected with the sea." Samuel Robotham says, "It is affirmed that the intensity of attraction increases with proximity and vice versa. How then, when the waters are drawn up by the Moon from their bed and away from the Earth's attraction, which at that greater distance from the center is considerably diminished, while that of the Moon is proportionally increased, how is it possible that all the waters acted on should be prevented leaving the Earth and flying away to the Moon? If the Moon has power of attraction sufficient to lift the waters of Earth at all, even a single inch from their deepest receptacles, where the Earth's attraction is much greater, there is nothing in the theory of attraction of gravitation to prevent her taking to herself all the waters which came within her influence. Let the smaller body once overcome the power of the larger, and the power of the smaller becomes greater than when it first operated, because the matter acted on is nearer to it. Proximity is greater, and therefore power is greater. How then can the waters of the ocean immediately underneath the Moon flow towards the shores, and so cause a flood tide? Water flows, it is said, through the law of gravity or attraction of the Earth's center. Is it possible then for the Moon, having once overcome the power of the Earth, to let go her hold upon the waters through the influence of a power which she has conquered, and which therefore is less than her own? The above and other difficulties which exist in connection with the explanation of the tides afforded by the Newtonian system have led many, including Sir Isaac Newton himself, to admit that such explanation is the least satisfactory portion of the theory of gravitation. Thus we have been carried forward by the sheer force of evidence to the conclusion that the tides of the sea do not arise from the attraction of the Moon, but simply from the rising and falling of the floating Earth in the waters of the great deep. That calmness which is found to exist at the bottom of the great seas could not possibly be if the waters were alternately raised by the Moon and pulled down by the Earth." David Wardlaw Scott says, "Even Sir Isaac Newton himself confessed that the explanation of Moon's action on the tides was the least satisfactory part of his theory. This theory asserts that the larger objects attract the smaller, and the mass of the Moon being reckoned as only 1/8 of that of the Earth, it follows that if, by the presumed force of gravitation, the Earth revolves around the Sun, much more for the same reason should the Moon do so likewise, instead of which that willful orb still continues to go round our world. Tides vary greatly in height, owing chiefly to the different configurations of the adjoining lands. At Chepstow it rises to 60 feet, at Portishead to 50, while at Dublin Bay it is but 12, and at Wexford only 5 feet. That the earth itself has a slight tremulous motion may be seen in the movement of the spirit level, even when fixed as steadily as possible, and that the sea has a fluctuation may be witnessed by the oscillation of an anchored ship in the calmest day of summer. By what means the tides are so regularly affected is at present only conjectured. Possibly it may be by atmospheric pressure on the waters of the great deep, and perhaps even the moon itself, as suggested by the late Dr. Robotham, may influence the atmosphere, increasing or diminishing its barometric pressure, and indirectly the rise and fall of earth in the waters. Samuel Robotham says, bearing this fact in mind that there exists a continual pressure of the atmosphere upon the earth, and associating it with the fact that the earth is a vast plain stretched out upon the waters, and it will be seen that it must of necessity slightly fluctuate or slowly rise and fall in the water. As by the action of the atmosphere the earth is slowly depressed, the water moves towards the receding shore and produces the flood tide, and when by the reaction of the resisting ocean medium the earth gradually ascends and the waters recede, and the ebb tide is produced. This is the general cause of tides. Whatever peculiarities are observed, they may be traced to the reaction of channels, bays, headlands, and other local causes. That the earth has a vibratory or tremulous motion, such as must necessarily belong to a floating and fluctuating structure, is abundantly proved by the experience of astronomers and surveyors. If a delicate spirit level be firmly placed upon a rock or upon the most solid foundation which it is possible to construct, the very curious phenomenon will be observed of constant change in the position of the air bubble. However carefully the level may be adjusted and the instrument protected from the atmosphere, the bubble will not maintain its position many seconds together. A somewhat similar influence has been noticed in astronomical observatories, where instruments of the best construction and placed in the most approved positions cannot always be relied upon without occasional readjustment. In the past several decades, NASA has shown video of astronauts supposedly in low Earth orbit experiencing complete weightlessness or zero gravity. How is this weightless effect achieved if gravity doesn't exist? As it turns out, for the past several decades, NASA, together with Boeing, have been perfecting so-called zero-G planes and zero-G maneuvers, which are able to produce weightlessness at any altitude. Aboard modified Boeing 727s, specially trained pilots perform aerobatic maneuvers known as parabolas. Planes climb with a pitch angle of 45 degrees using engine thrust and elevator controls. Then, when maximum height is reached, the craft is pointed downward at high speed. The period of weightlessness begins while ascending and lasts all the way up and over the parabola until reaching a downward pitch angle of 30 degrees, at which point the maneuver is repeated. Therefore, all NASA's footage of astronauts aboard space shuttles or the International Space Station can be easily hoaxed and simulated in Earth atmosphere aboard a zero-G plane. In fact, watching footage of zero-G plane flights alongside footage of NASA astronauts, supposedly floating around their space shuttles and space stations, no observable difference can be seen between the two. Astronomers claim to have measured all the planets' distances, shapes, orbits, weights, relative positions, and times of revolution, all based on the law of gravitation, and without gravity, their entire cosmology folds under its own weight. Without gravity, people cannot stand upside down on a ball Earth. Without gravity, the Earth and planets cannot be revolving around the Sun. Without Newtonian gravitation, Einsteinian relativity, Copernican heliocentricity, and the entire Big Bang Ball Earth mythos cannot exist and falls to pieces. Gravity, both metaphorically and quite literally, just does not hold any water, not as a sound theory of cosmology, and not as a law supposedly responsible for holding in the world's oceans. William Carpenter says, "Man's experience tells him that he is not constructed like the flies that can live and move upon the ceiling of a room with as much safety as on the floor, and since the modern theory of a planetary Earth necessitates a crowd of theories to keep company with it, and one of them is that men are really bound to the Earth by a force which fastens them to it like needles round a spherical lodestone, a theory perfectly outrageous and opposed to all human experience, it follows that unless we can trample upon common sense and ignore the teachings of experience, we have an evident proof that Earth is not a globe. If we could, after our minds had once been opened to the light of truth, conceive of a globular body on the surface of which human beings could exist, the power, no matter by what name it be called, that would hold them on would then necessarily have to be so constraining and cogent that they could not live. The waters of the oceans would have to be a solid mass, for motion would be impossible. But we not only exist, but live and move, and the water of the oceans skips and dances like a thing of life and beauty. This is a proof that the Earth is not a globe. Gerard Hickson said, "Nearly 100 years ago, Kepler suggested that some kind of unknown force must hold the Earth and the heavenly bodies in their places, and now Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest mathematician of his age, took up the idea and built the law of gravitation. The name is derived from the Latin word gravis, which means heavy, having weight, while the law of gravitation is defined as that mutual action between masses of matter by virtue of which every such mass tends toward every other with a force varying directly as the product of the masses and inversely as the square of their distances apart. Reduced to simplicity, gravitation is said to be that which attracts everything towards every other thing. That does not tell us much, and yet the little it does tell us is not true, for a thoughtful observer knows very well that everything is not attracted towards every other thing. The definition implies that it is a force, but it does not say so, for that phrase mutual action is ambiguous and not at all convincing. Gabrielle Henriette says, "The system of gravitation which makes the sun the moving center of the universe, the awkward principles of which are anything but certain since they apply to invisible circumstances so that they cannot be checked, is here replaced by the old geocentric system universally accepted until the 17th century, in view, of course, of its undisputable obviousness, and in which the Earth, in a state of immobility and surrounded by the planets visibly moving round it, including the sun, is at the center of our universe. These two facts, which explain almost everything, are firstly the positive existence above the Earth of a solid dome constituting the sky, and secondly the non-material nature of the planets and constellations, which are not physical masses, but merely luminous manifestations without substance. These are the two circumstances which lead today to the fundamental transformation of astronomy." And Professor Bernstein, in his Letters to the British Association, writes, "The theory that motions are produced through material attraction is absurd. Attributing such a power to mere matter, which is passive by nature, is a supreme illusion. It is a lovely and easy theory to satisfy any man's mind, but when the practical test comes, it falls all to pieces and becomes one of the most ridiculous theories to common sense and judgment ever conceived."
Kind of the making of gravity. I was going to show the person who put this out there, had this in their video, but they have comments disabled, so I'm actually not going to.
And at the same time, all the lights are spinning around in sync with this complicated motion.
I mean, it was literally like these rigs had your life in their hands. If something broke, I had nothing to hold on to. Some camera came crashing through my face. Nothing I could do, you just say goodbye.
Sandra has this dancer background, so she took this approach of prepping herself for a very complicated choreography. She trained like crazy for 5 months so that she could work with those rigs without conveying the tension of the rigs. So in the moment of the performance, it's just pure expression.
Whether it was the cage or whatever rigging system they had, you just embraced the pain because these were all unique creations of brilliant people who had to think of something that doesn't exist in order to make a movie Alfonso was told couldn't be done. Explore, do you...
Did you guys hear that? Had to think of something that doesn't exist to create a movie they said couldn't be made.
These were all unique creations of brilliant people who had to think of something that doesn't exist. These were all unique creations of brilliant people who had to think of something that doesn't exist.
Something that doesn't exist. The International Space Station and spacewalks? Yeah.
Poppy! Explorer, permission to retrieve Dr. Stone?
Exactly, liars.
I'm Don Pettit. I'm a NASA astronaut, and I'm on the International Space Station.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology.
The kinds of technologies that we're testing out on Space Station are definitely helping us with our goals of going beyond low Earth orbit. So we have a really robust exploration program at NASA. We're also really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. I think humans are naturally driven to do this, and this is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
The plan that NASA has is to build a rocket called SLS, which is a heavy lift rocket. It's something that is much bigger than what we have today, and it will be able to launch the Orion capsule with humans on board, as well as landers or other components to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Once we travel beyond low Earth orbit, the crew will be exposed to larger amounts of radiation. So we have to design both the crew protection systems and our electronic systems to withstand this radiation.
Early in the next decade, a set of crewed flights will test and prove the systems required for exploration beyond low Earth orbit.
The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
So there's a rumour going around that the Earth spins on its axis, roughly 360 degrees in 24 hours. There are a number of experiments and demonstrations that can prove this. One such proof is the ability of a spinning gyroscope to remain rigid in space whilst the Earth spins below. The US Navy put out a training video in 1960 explaining this using diagrams, as shown here. The link to the entire video is in the description. Not only is it alleged to remain rigid in space, the angle that the gyroscope, quote-unquote, appears to rotate is said to be measurable using a very simple equation which is wholly dependent on your latitude on Earth and the actual orientation of the gyro. So, through maths, and based on an assumption that a spherical Earth is rotating about its axis, we should be able to predict the angle that the gyroscope will rotate over a given time at a given latitude. This notion has been accepted as fact by modern day science without a shred of evidence to support it. Nowhere can I find any video that demonstrates this apparent proof. I found the same assertion made about apparent drift all over the internet, including on aviation websites like this one, which gives more illustrations and the same equations for calculating the drift. My experiment / demonstration, which is coming up next, will be done using the Super Precision Gyroscope. These are manufactured here in England, and if you haven't guessed by the name, they're works of precision engineering to exacting standards. Here's a video by the manufacturer.
At last, a gyroscope that just works properly, just like you've always wanted. Novel, innovative, and precise. The fascinating properties of gyroscopes with their ability to maintain position and seemingly gravity-defying properties, will mesmerize both young and old alike. The super precision gyroscope is beautifully designed and manufactured to the highest precision. The gyroscope comes complete with its own electric starter motor. There's no need for string to start it. It's less fiddly, spins the gyro much faster, and doesn't put load to the delicate bearings. Even when spinning at 12,000 revolutions per minute, there is hardly any noise or vibration. And when it's up to full speed, it spins for a very long time. The gimbals are modular, allowing you to construct numerous configurations. You can build the standard setups to demonstrate nutation and precession, plus you can make your own setups to perform your experiments. The parts screw together, as well as 7 places around the gyroscope frame. It will provide hours of amusement and learning by showing just how gyroscopic forces affect our daily lives. Today, they can be found in aircraft, satellites, and many other guidance systems. Made from solid brass, aircraft-grade aluminium, and stainless steel. All of the components are precisely manufactured with state-of-the-art machines. We use some of the most accurate equipment available to detect the slightest imbalance. The brass rotor is dynamically balanced to within a few thousandths of a gram and assembled with ultra-low noise bearings. This meticulous attention to detail produces a true precision instrument that will last for years. The set includes the super precision gyroscope with electric starter motor and gimbals kit, complete with manuals and storage case. Our gyroscope is ideal for schools, universities, or anyone who just enjoys using well-engineered kit. It also makes a great gift for those with inquisitive minds.
Okay, so this is the setup I'm going to be using. You'll notice this side, there's like a blanking insert that goes into the bearing housing on this side. And on this side you attach the motor, so the hole is empty, just with the spindle sticking through. So I quickly realised that when I spun this thing up, due to the presence of material here and the absence of material here, there was a weight imbalance. So I contacted the manufacturer and asked them if this is expected, and they confirmed it was and offered to make me a one-off insert to go in here for free. But they also suggested that what I could do is use some Play-Doh, some kids' plasticine. So I did that. I got some of my daughter's Play-Doh, just spun it up to speed with the motor and then inserted this into the hole. That seemed to do the trick. I was able to balance it perfectly. Before I put this in, the extra weight caused this side to drop every time, and if it was over here it would drop this way. So that's how I overcame that. I've attached the whole setup to a protractor which I've blue tacked to the table, and I've blue tacked the actual the frame to the table as well. So this here is the angle that we're looking for. So what we're looking for is this effect. See how the gyro wants to rotate and stay in the original orientation? Well, that angle that it's rotating, that this bar appears to be rotating over the device, that is the angle that we're looking for. That is the angle that we should be able to calculate this gyroscope moving due to the rotation of the Earth underneath us. So without further ado, let's get on to the test. So I've just attached the motor there. It actually takes 4 AA batteries to power it, and I've run this test quite a number of times now and put quite a few batteries through it, so I kind of know how long they're going to last and what sort of sound comes from the motor. depending on how much power is left in the batteries. And I'd say there's about probably 75% power left in them at the minute, and that's based on 12,000 RPM maximum. That's probably about 8,000 or 9,000 RPM for this particular test. So it's getting up to speed now. We're going to remove the motor and replace it with the piece of Play-Doh to get it perfectly balanced. And now I'm going to demonstrate some precession by gently pressing on the horizontal bar there. And now I'm going to line it up as best I can, so that you cannot see the brass flywheel from above, and it's as sort of straight up and down as possible. So if we just take note of where we are now, at you can see a 0 on the top right, just to the right of the bar. You can see a 0 just there, and you'll note that you cannot see the brass flywheel from above now. So we are sort of dead centre above it. So now it's just a waiting game. So while we wait, let's just have a look at a brief history of the gyroscope, up to the point where it was first proposed that it could record the spin of the Earth. So this is just sort of one example that I found on the internet. There are lots and lots of different accounts, and they all differ slightly, but this one seemed like a sort of all-round recount of history. So in early times, people discovered the spinning top, a toy with a unique ability to balance upright while rotating rapidly. Ancient Greek, Chinese and Roman societies built tops for games and entertainment. The Maori in New Zealand have used humming tops with specially crafted holes in mourning ceremonies. In 14th century England, some villages had a large top constructed for a warming up exercise in cold weather. Tops were even used in place of dice. It was not until the late 18th and 19th centuries that scientists and sailors began attempting to use spinning tops as a scientific tool. At the time, sailors relied on sextants for navigation, measuring the angle between specific stars and the horizon. This method was limited, however, if choppy seas or fog obscured the true horizon, or clouds obscured the stars. Serson, an English scientist, noted in the 1740s that the spinning top had a tendency to remain level, even when the surface on which it rested was tilting. He suggested that sailors could use it as an artificial horizon on ships. Unfortunately, when Serson went to sea to test the idea, the ship sank and everyone was lost. A French scientist in the 19th century, Fleury, created a top that was continuously powered by air jets, blowing into mini buckets on the rim of the wheel, a process that had been used for thousands of gyros since. The first modern gyroscope was designed in the early 1800s by Johann Gottlieb Friedrich von Bernberger, a professor at the University of Tübingen in Germany. It was made with a heavy ball instead of a wheel, but since it had no scientific application, it faded into history. In the mid-19th century, the spinning top acquired the name gyroscope, though not through its use as a navigational tool. French scientist Léon Foucault had experimented with a long, heavy pendulum in an attempt to observe the rotation of the Earth. The pendulum was set swinging back and forth along the north-south plane, while the Earth turned beneath it. Foucault corroborated the observation by using a spinning top in a similar manner. He placed a wheel, rotating at high speed, in a supporting ring in such a way that the axis of the spinning wheel could move independently of the ring. In fact, the supporting ring moved over the course of a day, as it was connected to the surface of the rotating Earth. The axis of the wheel remained pointed in its original direction, confirming that the Earth was rotating in a 24-hour period. Foucault named his spinning wheel a gyroscope, from the Greek words gyros, which is revolution, and scopin, which is to see. He had seen the revolution of the Earth with his gyroscope. So from Wikipedia, Jean-Bernard Léon Foucault, born 18th of September 1819, was a French physicist best known for his demonstration of the Foucault pendulum, a device demonstrating the effect of the Earth's rotation. He also made an early measurement of the speed of light, discovered eddy currents, and is credited with naming the gyroscope, although he did not invent it. Foucault was the son of a publisher in Paris, where he was born. After an education received chiefly at home, he studied medicine, which he had abandoned in favour of physics due to a blood phobia. He first directed his attention to the improvement of Louis Daguerre's photographic processes. For 3 years he was experimental assistant to Alfred Donné in his course of lectures on microscopic anatomy. In 1851 he provided an experimental demonstration of the rotation of Earth on its axis and became well known to the public by Foucault's work. Foucault achieved the demonstration by showing the rotation of the plane of oscillation of a long and heavy pendulum suspended from the roof of the Pantheon in Paris. The experiment caused a sensation in both the learned and popular worlds, and Foucault pendulums were suspended in major cities across Europe and America, attracting large crowds. In the following year, he used and named the gyroscope as conceptually simpler experimental proof. In 1855 he received the Copley Medal of the Royal Society for his very remarkable experimental researches. In 1862 Foucault was made a member of the Bureau de Longitudes and an officer at the Legion of Honour. He became a member of the Royal Society of London in 1864 and a member of the mechanical section of the Institute a year later. He is also credited with determining the speed of light to be 298,000 km per second, which is only 0.6% in error of the currently accepted value, and devising a method of testing the mirror of a reflecting telescope to determine its shape. So reading between the lines, he was a man of significant academic accomplishment and recognition at the time. One has to wonder then why, when you read the Wikipedia article about Léon Foucault, does it have this one line at the end? Near his death, he returned to Roman Catholicism that he had previously abandoned. Draw your own conclusions. So going back to the test, we've exceeded 6 minutes now and there's no observable movement. You can still see the zero to the right of the bar in its entirety, and you still cannot see the brass flywheel from above. So how much should the gyro have precessed? What angle should the gyro's axis have moved? The calculation is the sine of the latitude times 15 degrees per hour. My current latitude is exactly 53.06 degrees north. So the angle in which the gyro should have moved in 6 minutes is 1.2 degrees. Now this doesn't sound a lot, but let's assume that Léon Foucault's experiments were performed in Paris. He should have seen even less based on his latitude. And let's not forget that he didn't have an electric motor spinning his gyro up to 9,000 RPM. So I'm just going to stop it now. You saw then that there was still plenty of energy left in that flywheel, and it was able to precess when I moved it. So out of sheer curiosity I decided to fix the motor to the gyro and put a counterweight on the other side, which is slightly heavier than the motor, so I counterweighted the counterweight with more Play-Doh until I got it perfectly balanced, and ran the motor for, I think it was 10 minutes on this one. I'll show you a few minutes of it, but I'm not going to show the whole lot. If anybody wants me to, I can upload the whole video. It's pretty boring, it just does nothing. But this is now the equivalent of, I guess, modern navigational aviation instruments, you know, with sustained rotation. In Foucault's tests, the rotational velocity would have been continually decreasing. If the batteries are fully charged, I can actually get about 19 minutes of sustained rotation once I've taken the motor off, which is a hell of a lot on this gyroscope. I did actually try putting the motor on and keeping it on and just running it, I think it was for about an hour with a full set of batteries, and still I observed absolutely no movement whatsoever. So it appears that whether you've got the motor on or you've got it up to speed and then taken it off, it doesn't matter, it still doesn't move. So I just cut to 10 minutes Like I say, if anybody wants me to upload the whole 10 minutes, I will. Or if anybody wants to see me put it through for an hour with the motor on, I'll video that and show you no movement as well. Bearing in mind that after an hour, it should have rotated at about 12 degrees. These are some of the gyros that Leon Foucault used in his experiments. The large one at the back on sort of a wooden tower was a later edition. That one wasn't manufactured until 1867. But the ones at the front were all part of the same setup, and they were demonstrated in 1852, so 15 years earlier. And what you do is you take the flywheel out of the gimbaled, the brass gimbal stand on the right, and you place it in this wooden sort of housing and spin it up. Quite how it was spun up isn't clear, couldn't really find that out, but once it's up to speed, they then take it out of this wooden frame and transport it back into the brass gimbal set. Then you see the long pointing arm, the white pointing arm, coming from the sort of axis, the rotational axis there, onto the little measuring stand, which would have had graduations marked on it. And then with the eyeglass, he would look through it and see what the sort of rotation is. So you can see what we're looking at is a very, very tiny amount, and that's due to the fact that he couldn't spin his gyro up for very long back then. Some of the sources I found said it was only between 150 and 200 RPM, which I'm sure doesn't sound right, because I think I could spin that up quicker with a piece of string wrapped around the spindle. But that's what it says. So he wouldn't have had long to actually get this reading before the gyro slowed down to a stop. What, maybe 3-4 minutes? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say 5 minutes. So based on a latitude in Paris, that's less than 1 degree's movement in 5 minutes. So you can start to see why he needs the extended arm to sort of exaggerate the angle, and the sort of magnifying telescope looking device, because the movement is extremely small. Now this movement could purely be down to a weight imbalance like I had, or it could be the friction in the bearings. Remember, this was 1852, technology wasn't as it is today. If you remember on the manufacturer's video, they said that there's absolutely no load on these bearings. So whether he was lying about seeing any movement, or whether he did see some movement, but it was just due to the inferior setup he had, I guess we'll never know. Now some of you might be thinking, aircraft directional gyros do actually drift, and this is true. The pilot has to realign the gyro compass with the magnetic compass every 15 minutes. That's good practice, I know that from personal experience. And this is said to happen because of apparent drift. They say it quite clearly in the 1960s US Navy video that I've linked to. They blame this completely on apparent drift. But I'm going to try and simulate what I think is happening, and why pilots have to realign the compass every 15 minutes. So what I've done is I've aligned the vertical peg here with the vertical casing of the gyro there, and I've aligned it, this bar, the bottom bar there, with this foot here, with this third foot. So I'm going to simulate turbulence, vibration from the aircraft, track changes, by just wiggling this bar. So this is only a gradual thing. Every 15 minutes it drifts out slightly, and it varies as well. Sometimes it drifts quicker than other times, and as pilots will be aware, after any sudden or hard banks or you know, sort of large turns, the compass seems to drift even further and quicker. So let's realign the... No, it's not been doing it for long enough yet. Let's give it a few more. There you can see it's already drifting that way. And it doesn't matter which way, it just depends on the bias of the turn, or the bias of the number of turns in any particular direction. It will tend to drift that way. And there you can see, look, it's gone quite a long way out now. So that's what I think accounts for the corrections that the pilot must make every 15 minutes to realign the gyro compass with the magnetic compass. And what of the artificial horizon? That's a gyro as well. Why doesn't that need resetting every 15 minutes? Surely that would be subject to the exact same drift as the directional gyro. But it's actually considered bad practice to realign your artificial horizon during flight because you don't know whether you're aligning it to a straight and level orientation. So why does the directional gyro drift but the artificial horizon gyro doesn't? Well, I believe it's because the directional gyro is 2-axis, so it's allowed to move this way and it's allowed to move this way, but if it moves this way, the actual flywheel moves with it. In a 3-axis gyro, it can actually move this, the axis can move this way, but the gyro flywheel stays aligned like this. But logically, if the directional gyro precesses due to wanting to remain rigid in space, the artificial horizon gyro would necessarily have to do the same, but it doesn't. So for all the naysayers out there who think I might be somehow deceiving or I'm doing something wrong, be my guest. Get yourself a gyro and demonstrate it rotating or appearing to rotate, and to the exact angle, because it should work like clockwork. If you're not willing to do that, then you are just accepting the word of some dude that performed an experiment 164 years ago that you've never witnessed yourself and nobody else alive today has ever witnessed. After all, it's a really easy experiment. All you need to do is get a perfectly balanced gyroscope, set it running and wait. You can't really do much wrong. Thanks for watching.
Earth is a level, motionless plane with the sun, moon, and stars revolving over and around us just as you experience every day. The North Pole is the magnetic monopole center point, with Polaris, the North Pole star, situated directly above. Polaris is the only motionless star in the heavens, with all the other constellations revolving perfect circles over the Earth every night. The so-called planets, known to the ancients as wandering stars, were named such because they were observed then, as we can observe today, to wander the heavens, taking their own unique spirograph-like patterns, making both forward and retrograde motions over and around the Earth during their cycles. Meanwhile, the fixed stars were named such because they were observed then, as we can observe today, to stay fixed in their constellation patterns night after night, year after year, century after century, never changing their relative positions. If Earth was truly a tilting, wobbling, spinning space ball, as NASA and modern astronomy proclaim, rotating 1,000 miles per hour on its axis, revolving 67,000 miles per hour around the Sun, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the galaxy, and shooting off several million more miles per hour through the universe, the star patterns would never look the same 2 nights in a row, let alone be fixed in exactly the same constellations for thousands upon thousands of years. The reality is that the Earth and Polaris do not move, while everything else in the heavens revolves over Earth and around Polaris, east to west, like in a planetarium dome. Our Earth planetarium, however, is so vast that perspective won't allow any observer to see all the stars simultaneously from any one vantage point. We can see Polaris, Ursa Major and Minor, and other northern constellations from every point north of the equator simultaneously, but conversely cannot see the so-called South Pole star, Sigma Octantis, the Southern Cross, or other outer constellations simultaneously from every point south of the equator, because they all sweep over a great southern arc from their rise in the evening to their setting in the morning. Facing north, the stars turn counterclockwise from right to left. Facing south, they turn clockwise from left to right. Facing east, they rise in front and set behind, while facing west, they rise behind and set in front. So their apparent motion, angle, and inclination changes depending where you are on Earth and what direction you are facing. But their actual movement is always east to west.